These are familiar faces.
Yeah, definitely some wonderful people that we know and love.
Okay, Scott, did you have time to take a nap?
Nope.
Ah! Did
I
you
did
laugh?
lay down, but I didn't fall asleep. Well, welcome everybody. And welcome to kind of very spontaneous afternoon event that Eden and I decided to put together. Um, all about the divine feminine, the divine masculine, how we integrate that within ourselves, how we heal our past pain, and really come into a much greater healing. And there's a something kind of interesting that's kind of I have an opportunity to practice the divine masculine, showing great patience for the divine feminine, because my teaching partner Eden, I think, just showed up. So we didn't get a chance to meet beforehand, but I think I just saw her coming. There she is. Hello, Eden.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Scott. Excuse my tardiness. So good to be here with you. I've just recently moved. I'm in a bit of a recoherence in a new space and new internet and unpacking boxes. So we're just doing our best.
Good. Well, I'm glad you're here. But I want to acknowledge, and I'm going to still bring them on. When I didn't know if Eden was going to make it or not, my wonderful teaching partner for a year and a half, Trish, agreed to jump in, and her beloved Misha also agreed to jump in. So I'm definitely going to still want to include all four of us really talking about what the divine feminine and divine masculine means. It's kind of cool having a couple with us. And obviously, Trish is somebody that I've worked with a lot. So, and we're going to make this a very audience participatory show as well. So, we're going to want to hear from all of you. So, let's just start. I'm going to actually ask the four of us, what does the integration of divine feminine and divine masculine even mean to each of you? And Eden, I'll start with you.
So this is a big part of my life and my teachings. After being in a divine feminine mystery school as first an initiate and then a teacher now for 13 years, we work with embodying divine feminine aspects and principles. And I noticed over the years that there is this need to elevate the feminine and to see the feminine as sacred in our culture. In the West, she's been kind of suppressed, or not kind of, very suppressed, and we've been robbed of strong feminine archetypes collectively. So for the first part of my own kind of soul initiation and awakening journey, it was about how to honor the feminine in me and to see her in the world. And then what I recognized was that we didn't have a lot of healthy examples of what it is to be in a relationship with someone who is consciously embodying divine masculine principles or attributes. We have this theory or this vision of masculinity in the world based on our leaders and what we think is like powerful. And we have this kind of distorted view of this sky god who's punishing us. And if we're sinners, we're going to be punished for it as a divine masculine in the West. So for us to feel into what is divine masculine? What are those qualities and energies that we're actually elevating and embodying and wanting our men to embody, and then also embodying in ourselves? And for me, the divine masculine is the light. It's like this pure, clear light of consciousness and presence of love that is just absolutely unconditional. And this divine masculine embodiment works with both men and women in being in alignment, in that sword quality, in the clarity of our truth and our actions being in alignment. And we have a lot of examples of what masculine energy that's more, we call it like overblown yang, is like in the world, where it's out of alignment, where it's the element of the fire and the air, the yang elements that are overblown and consumptive and destructive. And we're inviting this balancing in all beings where our divine feminine isn't collapsing into the overblown yin, which is like the water in the earth where it becomes stuck in the mud and the muck, where it's flowing and grounded and nurturing. So for me, divine feminine, divine masculine is coming into balance in the light qualities of both of these, the yin and the yang, both in ourselves and with our beloveds and our others, intimate others and friends and community, where we're recognizing the divinity in them and calling forth that higher octave of expression. So that's kind of the, using these elemental ways of looking at energy, because really it takes both forces to create life. Everything is both of these energies swirling and merging together. That's how we got here. We need the two. We need the polarity to create the life force here. So that's everything. Divine feminine, divine masculine energy creates all life.
Beautifully stated. That's a beautiful story. Thank you, Eden. I'm going to turn it over to Trish and then to Misha to hear their thoughts.
Thank you. Eden, I really love what you shared. And I just want to pinpoint a couple things. So some of you know, maybe not all of you, but some of you know that I'm kind of neck deep in a sociology course, as well as I'm taking Bridge Feltus's anti-racism course again, which we are tracing back a lot of history. And so on my side time, I'm looking at, when did women become a secondary or second class? And 4,000 BC, in the Sumerian time, like we have some aspects of quality here, of feminine equality and masculine equality. It's not as, that the strengths of each, not only just the physical being, but the emotional and the spiritual being are being honored all the way up until 64 AD, when the Romans start to kind of impress their misogyny. I mean, this is kind of where we started it. And it has now been bred into us to see women or people of color as less than human. So the balancing of the feminine and masculine to me is the coming back to the truth, coming back to the balance between what the female is just so has its rhythm and has its capacity of love and compassion and vastness and motherhood. And in these things, we have a connection to spirit and a connection to body and a connection to empathy. And that's these pieces that really, have been used against us, for one, but are juicy pieces of femininity. And then there's this aspect of healthy, safe masculine. That's the loving protector, or the loving permissionary even. Like they kept the family. They held these roles. And in a lot of African societies, the woman was the person who runs the family. The matriarch runs the family, and the man was there to support her, have her back. And so I think that the balance of that, of the masculine and feminine, is to just really see these beautiful pieces and come back to the state of love, rather than back to this hierarchical kind of weird oppressive game that we're still unknowingly participating in.
Beautiful. Looks like you didn't. I think I saw Eden putting her hand up. So.
Oh, yeah. This is something I do where it's like, I so witness what you're saying. I second that. It's like a mirror of aho. And I did notice we had this great comment in the chat from Connie. She said, "I'm so happy you're addressing the divine feminine, divine masculine balance. This is refreshing. Rather than emphasizing the feminine over the masculine and demonizing men, that makes no sense to her." And I am with you, Sister Connie. Thank you for naming that. Honestly, in the 13 Moon Mystery School circles, sisterhood circles with women for years, I was noticing women kind of complaining and blaming and even a little bit bashing men at times. And as priestesses, we're here to step into those divine feminine qualities that Trish was naming, that empathy, compassion, and more unconditional love, the divine mother's embrace. And after a while, I really, as a leader and teacher in that community, needed to initiate these women and say, stop seeing men as the enemy, stop amplifying and naming all of the things that you hate about men or don't like about men. And what if you look for the divine masculine and consciously elevate it and call it forth, and ask the deeper questions in your men in your life when you see them not in alignment with that. There's probably some part, like Trish said, we're like, so it's the water we've been swimming in, we've been so conditioned by for so many millennia, I would say generations, but it's more than generations. So the imprinting is so thick that it really is up to the ones that are noticing, well, we don't have to do it like this anymore. What would love say? What would love do now? How do we invite our men and our sisters into a higher frequency of harmony and a loving conversation about this? So I'm right there with you, Connie. It's so important.
Thank you for bringing that up, Eden. Thank you. In a moment, I'm going to bring Misha up, but, just since we're on this topic of demonizing men, I want to start by saying, as a privileged white man, I can really acknowledge a lot of embarrassment that I have for my gender and for kind of what I represent, because clearly, for the most part, white men have been controlling things for a very long time and have not done a sustainable, loving, compassionate job with that. So I really want to acknowledge that, and I carry that in my being. But I also had an experience that I was reminded of when Connie's comment came in, and then what you had to say, Eden. A couple of years ago, at the height of the Me Too movement, I was brought in to mediate a situation. And it was a gentleman that I've known in the community for a long time who clearly had crossed boundaries. And he's a leader, and women had come forth with their allegations against him. And I was brought in to mediate and to help kind of determine what to do. And I had to control myself because I actually had a prejudice about this person because I had coached one of the women that he had injured. So I kind of had to really, work with that. But the thing that began to happen that was shocking, yes, there were genuine violations, but then all these other women who either didn't know him at all or barely knew him got on this bandwagon to crucify him. And it went from a sense of restorative justice and a sense of, really having him own what happened, which he was doing, into, I could really see like almost a mob mentality to destroy him, coming mostly from people who actually had not been impacted. And it was a wake-up call to me of mob mentality that could even happen in our so-called New Age spiritual circles. So I hadn't thought of that in a while and hadn't planned on bringing that into this conversation. But I'm glad that I did, and I'm glad that it came up, because that element is there. As the Buddha said, always take the middle road. And so let's find that balance of taking responsibility, calling people out, but not going into a witch hunt.
Yeah. I so agree, Scott. I just wanted to mention something that your share really reminded me of during the Me Too movement. And then there was the Women's March with the pink hats. And I remember, many friends of mine in this kind of feminine rising movement flew to Washington. They were part of that. It was like, yay, at first really enrolled into, we're rising and it's all beautiful. And then I saw this poster being carried in the march of Wonder Woman, and she was ripped like a bodybuilder, very masculine build, and she was punching Donald Trump. And I was like, something's not right about this. If we're really saying like we need this feminine rising, what is feminine about that? What is that messaging really, when it's like war and violence and, kick your ass because you're doing this toxic masculine thing, so we're going to beat you up for it. And it's actually the opposite of what's really needed, which is that deeper forgiveness ceremony, that healing and those amends that are needed from both sides. In a way, it takes two to tango, so to speak. There is a collapsed feminine that has also fueled more of this entitled masculine. In our history, women have been dependent on men for survival. Like Trish was saying, as the protectors, the providers, the hunters. The women needed strong, good men. And what's really missing is initiated men who are being initiated in wisdom teachings and taught by the good uncles to take care of the women and children and look for the way to protect and provide rather than get and take and use. And I think the reason the Me Too movement had so much like that mob mentality behind it is because when the suppressed have been suppressed for so long,
That's right,
and victimized for so long, there's like this pendulum swing effect that often happens where they become the oppressors or the perpetrator in the revenge energy of that.
that's
So,
absolutely true.
yeah, the only answer is what you said, that middle way, the
Finding the middle
compassion.
ground. Yeah. I'm going to bring Trish and Misha back on. And I know that, Misha, you have played a beautiful role recently in calling for men to be more accountable. And Trish, I don't know the details well enough. So I don't know, Trish, if you want to establish the story a little bit about how Misha has come forward in that way to introduce him.
I don't know that.
I know, I love it.
Oh God. I can speak of
I
personally.
can speak for myself, honey.
Okay, all right. Well,
So-
I think Misha knows what I'm talking about. So, hey, Misha.
Yeah, hi.
Hey.
So it's an honor to be here with both of you, Scott and Eden. You've been doing this for a lot longer than I've been in this world. I was in the tech and white collar world for a long time, and about 4 or 5 years ago started on a path to become a men's coach. And what I found was, in part influenced by the Me Too movement, that my calling was to be what I sometimes refer to as a repair doctor. Like, I literally focus on accountability and restoration, and even transformation through accountability and restoration for men who have done harm, usually sexually. So I've supported men who have abused power, done sexual harassment, who have been called out. I've done a lot of supporting men following a call out. And so the essence of my practice, which you can find at evolve.men, is about using the harm that you've done as a place of motivation to evolve into a much higher, as you, Eden, you had some really beautiful turns of phrase for this, for like a higher frequency, right? Of accessing a far more powerful understanding of your own humanity and of your place in the collective and of your masculinity, et cetera. So I've found it to be a very potent space, because many men I've found are frankly too caught up in the samsara of just capitalist survival to think more about these phrases, to even like the word divine is going to be like a turnoff for like 90% of American men. You know what I mean? Like right there, you're just like lost, like most people, and I'm sure you've experienced this with male clients. Anyway, so that's the top level of my work.
So, two things. I'm going to show people your website, which I have not actually seen before, but it is evolve.men, and I'm certainly going to subscribe. Making it easier to be a better man. That's very cool. Integrity coaching. And I was aware that you were doing work, Misha, with calling men out. So just while we're on this topic for a moment, what have you learned works and what have you learned it doesn't work?
I think about this all the time. Well, I'd say that one of the most important things that I establish when I'm engaging with a man is something that Terry Real calls leverage. Engaging with a man who's just been called out and is totally in fight or flight because he's like looking at his reputation and his like possibility for his expansive career being like crashed and burned, Scott used words like crucify, destroy, witch hunt. It's those words that tend to like put men in the fight or flight. And then that means that usually they're not as receptive. So I don't usually do a lot of like a lot of coddling. I establish in some way that there's something that they want very clearly that I have access to in a supportive role that usually has to do with respect in the community. Like reputation management is actually a huge thing that speaks to the very heart of a man in our society, that it's not just PR. So I make it clear that it's possible to have a strong reputation, that it's possible to rehabilitate reputation. And I don't immediately tell them that the only way to do that is through humility, contrition, and gratitude, because they don't want to hear that yet. Usually, but I have to convince them that it's actually totally possible and that I've supported men to get through a call out without, frankly, thinking of it like a death knell, without thinking of it like a crucifixion, which I tend to find not a helpful framing.
Yeah, right. I like that term, reputation management. That's a really, really strong. I'm going to bring Eden and Trish back on for a minute.
Please.
I'd love to respond to something Misha said. And
Yeah.
Misha, I was just noting when you said that as soon as you kind of talk to men about like stepping into their divine masculine embodiment, you've lost about 90% of them or more. And I was thinking about, what about the word sacred? Like, what is it to be in sacred relationship? Like, I think maybe more than divine, there's something about the sacred. He's shaking his head. He's like, I don't know if they'd be ready for the sacred either.
Well, it just depends on where the client's at, Like
Yeah.
I recently had a relatively young client, he had just gotten called out on Twitter for sexual assault. He didn't come from those words weren't where he was at. He's in tech. He's like a young guy. He's just trying to achieve in capitalism. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and the only thing he's seeing right now is that this whole call out stuff is getting in the way of my earning potential.
Wow.
So it's not that that's not
Right.
It's just maybe I find that with at least a lot of my clients in the earlier sessions, if I'm working with them for like 6 months, I might not even use any either feminist terms or sacred terms for the first few months. And then like slowly introduce as there's a little bit more openness to seeing the larger project. But that's it. I mean, I don't know. You've been doing this for a lot longer than I have. I'll defer to you, in fact.
Right. You can send me some that are ready to go really deep into like an awakening process. Yeah. So what I'm aware of is the pattern, like the larger pattern overview, as humanity's been kind of taking and raping the earth and the women. There's this feeling of like, what can I get here? What can I get for myself out of this? And it's a very egoic, very root chakra based consciousness that is, has got us in the situation we're in so many ways in the world. So as we're moving into this turning of the ages, Scott and I have been talking about, we are in this great shifting into this new age that is not going to fly for much longer at all, because it's a lose-lose game in the biggest way. And so this is a very important subject. It's actually really, really powerful to talk about it like this with men. I'm so glad.
And it's wonderful to have this wonderful group. I am going to read some more quotes and comments from our audience in a moment. But I wanted to touch also on the whole idea about why men might have a push away from whether we say divine or sacred. And one of the things that I've observed is that almost everyone in our kind of social group, our tribe, if you will, has had a disillusionment from whatever religion they were raised with. Almost everyone broke away from whatever they were raised with, and usually for good cause. Usually they saw the hypocrisy or whatever. Generally speaking, in my unscientific research, but my experience, most women have found their own spirituality. They have found, whether it was through meditation or yoga or a martial art form even, or a musical instrument or goddess work with Eden, they
Or
have found a spiritual path, right? I'll bring Trish on in a second. Um, Men haven't had that same thing. Men have not, you don't see as many men at a yoga class. You don't see as many men at a meditation group. Men have gone more into sports or more into other things. And so a lot of men threw the baby out with the bathwater. They threw out a sense of trusting in a connection to divinity or the sacred in their maybe even very intelligent reaction to the bullshit or the hypocrisy that they might have had forced on them as a child or at some point in their life. So, Trish, I saw you start to say something. I'm curious.
you were sharing a little bit about like how women come into their sacredness, and I was like, yeah, through the pain of menstruation. Like, I don't know if anyone else, like, that's a pretty wild experience. I mean, Eden, have you had some like crazy dreams around those times? Like, I don't know. It's like when you wake up in a body that runs estrogen and you're a vag having person, you're like, oh my God, this is kind of a wildly vibrant experience.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot to discuss about that, just being in tune with the moon and the moon blood cycle and having a womb and what that is. And, as we talk about what it is to honor the sacred and the divine, how that's been kind of like, made yucky and not honored. And I have a dear male friend who really embodies more of that archetype of the steward and the steward of earth, steward of when a woman's mooning, it's like, oh, can I get you tea? Can I rub your feet? There's an honoring of that that's missing in our culture between men and women. There's a fear of it. There's a kind of cultural suppression of anything that's like blood mysteries, or, that's a whole tangent there, but just by that very fact that it's been, kind of suppressed and pushed aside, like that's a medical thing, or like we don't really talk about that, instead of how can we honor our women when they're going through this really important phase that has to do with bringing life onto the planet. It's like life itself. So I'm glad you brought that up. There's another thing I saw that I wanted to comment about in the chat with putting men in the man box. Someone said that men are entrained from the very beginning not to cry. Boys don't cry, or don't be a pussy, and well, that's a really weird thing to say when you're trying to tell someone not to be weak or wimpy or something, when the yoni portal births life and goes through an incredible amount of intensity. And it's one of the most incredibly strong and amazing things there is. So calling someone like kind of a bad name by using that, I always thought that was interesting. So for boys to be told you need to suck it up and not show emotion from the beginning of their lives has suppressed their own inner feminine, because the feminine is that feeling body receptive nature. It is that intuitive nature, their feminine essence to receive and respond to what they're feeling. And to shut that down so systematically is part of what we're experiencing now with lack of empathy and narcissism and the egoic, he who dies with the most toys wins race that we're seeing. So yeah, the feelings.
I think the direction we're going into, I just want to name two things and then Trish is next, is the pain of our childhood and how that impacted us and our programming. And when you were talking, I remembered something. I haven't had this memory in probably 20 years. I had a wonderful girlfriend a long time ago, back when I was, I think, in my 30s. And we actually ended up being together for a few years. But the very first time we were together and she was menstruating and a couple drops of blood spilled onto the carpet. It didn't matter to me. She got so, I'm so sorry. I'll clean it right up. And she right away, and it was as though It was as though, her dog had taken a shit on the carpet. She was so embarrassed and so ashamed. It was like, hey, it's okay, it's okay. And in talking to her previous boyfriend, actually ex-husband, would completely shame her about her blood. And I don't want to ever see that. I don't want to ever clean it. And it was so drilled into her. And at this point, this is a woman who's in her 30s. And she was a nurse and a wise woman in some ways. But I'm remembering now just how scared she was that I was going to shame her because she spilled a drop of blood on the carpet. And so I just want to point to the trauma of women on that level. And then I also just want to add to what you were saying about the trauma for boys growing up. And believe me, every boy has a story about being on the playground and you got hit by the ball and it hurt like hell and you made the mistake of crying for the very last time. Because after you cried, they all formed a circle around you and they called you pussy or faggot. That was a common one. All these words that dehumanized the feminine and dehumanized men that were feminine. It was both. So I just want to acknowledge that most of us have grown up with stuff like that.
Well, that is because we're socialized as such. And it goes very, very far back to where we started to dehumanize and other each other. I mean, it's not like we did it, but there's particular systems at play or people who wanted to make sure that they stayed in power. And so how do you do that is that you dehumanize someone. You make whatever their naturalness is as something that's barbaric or gross or something that you don't want to promote. And so women bleeding, which is not something we have a choice over, or the way that our bodies move, or the way that we pray, the way that we interact with the world, the way that we parent, and even with men, it's like, this is where patriarchy hurts everyone. This is where capitalism hurts everyone. This is where classism hurts everyone. This is it. Like, this is the whole reason why we're debating what is masculine and what is feminine. Like, there is this human beingness that is divine in general. And when I'm using they as meaning like a historical pattern of behavior in which we conform to so that we wouldn't get our heads chopped off or whatever.
Burned at the stake.
This is not a history lesson. But this is the way that it happens. So we're sitting here in 2022, kind of debating the sacredness of our humanity, the divinity of our humanity, and then saying like, well, Misha's supposed to show up in this way for me because that's what I've been socialized to make him want, like make me want from him. And it's like, wait, this person is a whole being. And if I can just delayer it for myself, if I can actually look at how I got here, like I woke up in this body into a society and into a cultural system that I didn't even really consent to. And now I'm like, oh, I can't wear jeans with pockets or dresses with pockets. Like I have to behave as a quote unquote woman, or I have to do these things that, I don't know, it doesn't seem like that would be the most loving, divine way. I mean, part of what we're talking about is, and what Scott was saying as well around sacred and divine, is that our natural spirituality has been beaten and murdered out of us. And so when it comes down to, I now just want to, I want to succeed in my capitalistic society, and I want to get all the things that I'm supposed to do to make me happy. And I don't want to push the edge. And I certainly want to be normal, quote unquote normal. Right. It's like, well, you guys, again, I tried to warn you. I'm like knee deep in all this crazy.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just kind of like, not me. I'm way over the edge of woo woo and the weird as WIRD or WYRD, and really not willing to, when I hear people kind of in the automatic programming, not speak up, at least if they're, in my circles, or, give me the permission to speak truth with love. I think that it's time to deprogram and uncondition in the most beautiful, loving way with so much compassion. Because you're pointing to so many important things. And one of the things I see in my circles is women starting to remember, like, even past lives or maybe concurrent timelines where they were burned at the stake. Or, one of our listeners said, I remember me and my cat being burned at the stake. So there's these memories of when I told my truth and shared my wisdom and my magic and my essence and my power as a feminine, intuitive, magical being. I was killed for it, incarcerated for it, Spanish Inquisitions, witch hunts, whatever timelines. So we're needing to get current in this body and this time, like you said, 2022, and awaken together and lift the veil. They call this the apocalypse, which means the unveiling. It's a time of great revelation of, like, what have we been doing unconsciously together in a shared dream nightmare? Like, what have we been co-creating out of balance that we can now bring back into the heart?
Misha, I know you wanted to say something.
I have so many things. I mean, there's definitely a point to be made about accessing a version of the divine masculine that speaks to today's society in a way that actually resonates with people living in today's society, right? So the divine masculine as a form of leadership for your tech company, right? Like there, you can actually, right? This doesn't have to be some separate arena in which you go full hippie. You can actually apply the essence of these lessons in a way that, like, works in your day to day, and that doesn't. And I think it's important to mention in any New Age circle, emasculate you, right? Mm-hmm. Which is, I think, one of the reasons that New Age spirituality, which frankly is different from, I think, a lot of other spirituality, Scott, in that it is so gender imbalanced. Yeah. New Age spiritual circles are different. Christian circles have got plenty of men. So do Jewish circles, for that matter. And I think there's a perception from the outside that New Age spirituality tends to emasculate men, which is ironic. There's an incredible group that I want to recommend for. I mean, there's men's groups out there doing really great work. Every Man, K4, Mankind Project for a long time, as well as this great group, Sacred Sons. But they do a lot of really beautiful work with the gathering men, and it's not soft and gentle. It's hard, which is, men love that. We go to a retreat. We don't want to be in a moon circle. We want to wrestle with each other. And literally, Sacred Sons runs like testosterone fueled, like violent wrestling thing, right? Where there's violence and there's aggression and there's anger and there's purpose and there's all those masculine things that, like, start to resonate as a men's experience. And I feel confident recommending them, in part because of that, because it's not just about accessing our feelings, which is totally acknowledged as a part of the injury patriarchy has done. But I think in terms of, like, men's work, there's both, like, acknowledging the harm patriarchy has done to, like, shut us off from our feelings, which is real, as well as acknowledging a form of testosterone driven masculine energy that's actually healthy and giving and protective and but real, and speaks to the violence that we all have inside us and speaks to the energy that we all have.
Right on. That is so right on. In fact, people are putting in the chat box wanting you to put the names of those groups into the chat box, and then I'll copy them, and because we've got a lot of people watching on Unify right now also, so I'll copy and put it in for our Unify friends. When you see me looking down, I'm looking at the Unify.
No, I'm doing the same over here.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I really wanted to mention, actually, I'll pause. I see Trish
Trish is jumping up.
Just want to say that there's something to say is speaking the language, right? So the reason why I speak the way that I do and I share how I share is because I'm not necessarily speaking to the spiritual crowd. I'm speaking to another crowd so I can bring them here. I'm like beckoning them to come over to the dark side or the light side.
I'd love to make a quick comment on what you just said. Well, go ahead, Trish, if you're not done. Just how we fear the dark in our culture, because the dark is the yin, it's the unknown, it's the feminine, right? And it's been villainized, it's been demonized, but it takes shadow and light, it takes dark. There's phases of rest and sleep and inward in the fallow field, but the culture is like, do, produce, go, always in the light. And that's what gives, especially women in the corporate world, adrenal fatigue and burnout right away. We're not honoring cycles. We're not honoring the dark and the rest. Yeah.
I want to read a couple of the comments that have come on in, and I'll go ahead and put everybody on so we can see people's reactions, our panelists' reactions. But first off, a lot of people are mentioning past life memory of being burned at the stake, or tortured or raped. A lot of that's coming up right now, especially in our Unified group. And I want to say something about, oftentimes we shut down or say, oh, well, that wasn't really a past life, who knows. So here's a wonderful little tool for working with past life memory. Don't get hooked on whether or not it actually historically happened. What matters is if you have a memory of being burned at the stake or crucified or tortured or raped, it represents that it is in your archetypal landscape. It might be your epigenetics. It might be past life. It might just be connecting to the collective. It doesn't matter. What matters is if you've had that experience, that perception, that lucid dream or whatever it is, it's in your archetypal landscape to work with. So I just wanted to add that since a lot of people are mentioning. And just a couple comments. Anna Ohm writes, darkness is a mystery to be explored for the jewels of illumination. Beautiful. Mary Noonan writes, Misha, bless you. We need healthy men to call out men into conscious sacred union. David brought up something I was going to bring up. There is a term called a snag, a sensitive new age guy. There is that. Shauna writes, as a female, I've always been attracted to men who have yin, who they are. I appreciate the beauty that yin can bring into the wholeness that a man is. New age or not, a man is more attractive to me when yin is present. Thank you, Shauna. We're doing our best. Deborah Haviland writes, a comment from earlier, even just the energy of judging another is so painful. It creates the separation, one up, one down, lose-lose game of dehumanizing. Empathizing with each other is so crucial for win-win. And then the last one that I'm going to read is from Connie Baxter. I nurtured my sons feminine and masculine. I let him drop out of first grade, knowing that the loving universe would chase him around to give him the experiences he would need to become the gift he promised to bring to the world. He is now a flourishing photographer in LA with the current cover of People magazine. Congratulations, Connie. He is the trust frequency poster child. I'm wondering how that impacts you, having raised two children, including currently a 16-year-old son, Eden.
I love what she just said. And I've been questioning letting my son take a year off now after this crazy pandemic where they were on Zoom and now they need to wear masks all day in their classrooms. It's really horrible. The new kids are really bright and different too. He doesn't want to play by the rules of this game. He's really not interested in getting the grades to make the teachers like him. He's researching things on his own and doing where his heart is calling him and playing music by ear. And I think that there's something about nurturing the being's passionate proclivities and who they really are. And I can feel where he has told me, because we're speaking of masculine, feminine, gender, and identity today. He's told me that it's very hard having a super alpha male father because he's more in touch with his feminine side. He paints his nails, he grows his hair. And I said, are you identifying as a he or a they? Or, he has a lot of friends. Someone asked what we think of androgyny. He says, I identify as a cisgender heterosexual male. And many of my friends are on the vast spectrum of gender and sexual preference identity in his group, in this age group. And for me and for us in our generation to even learn how to navigate with that and get the pronouns right, it's a whole different reality. I think nurturing. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just glad you're saying this. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no, it's a real leap in consciousness. And I'm a fan of this book. I don't know, many of our listeners might have heard about Richard Rudd and the gene keys. It's a way of looking at our genetic evolutionary potential in something that's called hologenesis, how we move out of shadow patterns into our gifts and then ultimately into our divinity, our siddhis, yogic word for like superpowers. And Richard Rudd has a deep writing on the 55th gene key. There's 64 of them. And the 55th is about moving out of victim consciousness into freedom. And in that chapter, he talks about gender, and he talks about how we're moving out of a root chakra fight and fucks, or excuse my language on public things, but it's literally like that energy of like kill you before you kill me to survive in the old tribal days, and moving into this age of more presence and heart where we're not as polarized, and that gender will it will not be as polarized in the future. His theory is that there'll be polarity and there'll be, procreation, but we won't have war, and we won't have that kind of like lower chakric drive to procreate. That kind of animal instinct will be elevated or sublimated into more of our heart-centered presence with each other. So when I look at my son, even and his friends, I'm like, wow, they're really, really open about like different ways of being as boys or men, young men. And there's not as much of that. There's testosterone, but it's not as heightened. Like many of his friends, maybe because he goes to an art school too, I have to consider that. Many of his friends are very feminine, very feminine.
Wow. A couple of things I wanted to mention. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to thank Trish. Trish is who helps keep me in track of proper terminology. She's been my partner on the Friday night show that we do together for a year and a half. So I periodically, what's the proper way I'm supposed to say things these days? So thank you, Trish, for helping me with that. Us baby boomers need the millennials. We do. We need them. And they need us probably more than they might want to admit to, but that's a whole other thing. But, there's two things I wanted to mention. One is epigenetics. We all carry the genetic download of our ancestors' trauma going back 7 generations. If you haven't heard that before, think about that for a minute. And 7 generations becomes a lot of people. That's a lot of people whose genetics we're carrying. And we don't know the names of most of them. We certainly don't know the lives that most of them led. And so all of us are carrying pretty deep, whatever it may be. It may be a long lineage of alcoholism, victim, domestic violence, both sides, rape, murder, war. All these things are inside of us before we're even born. And I do believe, and I thought of this as Eden was talking about the gene keys, that this time in this awakening world, in this time of planetary transformation, our job, no matter what age we are at, is to do our best to learn how to honor, manage, and to the degree possible, heal our epigenetics. I so appreciate the people that I know who the alcoholism stopped with them. The victim story stopped with them. The lineage of whatever that was. Last thing I want to say about that, at the same time, in balance, that's not to put a knock on our ancestors. I want to remind all of us that we are all leading incredibly amazing lives of freedom. We have tremendous freedom in our lives. And we have that freedom because our ancestors crossed the plains, came over the oceans, fought in the wars, went through what they went through, had 3 jobs. So when they were going through that stuff, they didn't have time or resources to deal with the alcoholism or the domestic violence or whatever it might have been. I believe that's our payback. They have given us the freedom that we now have. And so let's pay it back as part of a cycle by really working on whatever the family lineage is, whatever those epigenetics that come up for us to deal with are. So that's my little presentation on that.
Oh, I'm just doing my little hand thing. Like, yes to that.
Thank you for giving me the hand.
Yeah, well, that's part of the inner alchemy work that we do in the circles, because a lot of the wound body stuff, we don't even have a story for it. There's ways that we're carrying things that then project into our current relationships. And like you say, sometimes it's our ancestral wounding. We don't even have the childhood memory. It's in there, and it's not as important to know the whole story. Like you're saying, we don't even know why we have this, like, this contraction or this fear or whatever it is that then creates a reactive pattern in our relationships and sabotages a loving communication. So in the circles that I lead, we sit in the mystery and in our inner alchemy, where it's like tears rolling. We hear someone else sharing something we don't even need to know. It's like medicine for us. And a lot of it's ancestral, and honoring our ancestors and honoring our inner children deeply, deeply. Those little girls and little boys that they just wanted to be loved unconditionally. And it's so rare in this world to have been given a direct experience of unconditional love. So when we talk about sacred or divine, feminine and masculine, for me, it's embodying unconditional love, embodying that.
I want to read a few more comments that are coming in. Cynthia writes, spot on, Scott, spiritual warriors we are. Jerry did the math, and he said 7 generations is 260 ancestors. Wow. Christy points out that we're just discovering how to heal. Anna Ohm writes, deep gratitude to our ancestors and our elders. Absolutely. Atira writes that the Holocaust wiped out her information beyond 2 generations. Cynthia writes, again, the young will get us clear of all the old patriarchy. And then the last thing I'll read is, well, I'll read 2 more. Connie, it's a frequency shift. As the earth moves into higher vibrations and we do the work to keep up with her, we then move into that masculine and feminine balance that today's show is all about. And then finally, Jane writes, all of us have been all sexes, all races in our past lives. We need to accept this to move forward and just love and care for each other. Thank you, everybody. Eden, where shall we go next?
So beautiful. Well, I think we have an hour for today? What was our time that we were going to?
I had imagined that it would be 90 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we have some time. So I'd like to talk, and after hearing Misha's share, I'd like to talk a little bit more about sacred masculine archetypes, because I feel like with the men that I work with, for them to deeply grok and start to embody those archetypes has been really empowering, and especially one archetype that's less known. So I had the wonderful experience of meeting a man named Dr. David Gruder, and he's a psychologist that was back in the day in the 70s with the creators of the Mankind Project, really channeling in these archetypal initiations that Misha was pointing to, where the guys, they're not sitting around holding hands, oming or feeling the moon, like you said. They're very, very deep and intense masculine initiations. And they're working with 4 primary archetypes of the divine masculine. And that is the lover, the magician, the warrior, and the king. And then Dr. David Gruder and I were speaking, and he said, I really wish that we had included the steward. And in fact, the proper balance would have been the lover, the warrior, the magician, and the steward, almost like a Native American prayer wheel, a directional, 4-directional wheel, and the king as the center of the above and below that incorporates all of those archetypes in balance, because that's what the good king, the just king would do. And that steward archetype, when we hear about what some might say humans were, we're divinely designed to be stewards of Gaia, stewards of the feminine, of the innocent, to take care of each other, to take care of the earth, to take care of the children. We've lost that connection to that word. And in ancient medieval times, the steward was the one that would hold the land and the castle and protect it when the warriors and the king would go out. It's that holder of the sacred, the protector of the sacred, not the campaigner in a forceful, active marching forth for new lands or conquering, but the holder and protector of what's already sacred. So I felt like amplifying that in our discussion today, and how important it is to reinvite that awareness of the stewardship of earth, of the children, of the innocent, of the feminine, not just for men, but for each other, to embody that. And for men, especially, to really feel into, the men who are on this call and on Unify, just feeling into where you are in that prayer wheel of balance with your lover, your magician, your warrior, and your steward, and how that can bring you into the balanced king. And I know there's a woman named Alison Armstrong. She's created an offering called Pax, which is peace in Latin, peace between men and women. And she interviewed like more than 15,000 men. And she was using these archetypes in a little bit different way, saying that all men move through these phases in life where they move towards king and then eventually maybe wizard in their elder years. And I think about how we often want to, as women, punish men for not being more like us. We don't understand that they're wired differently. And what she would say is, when they're on their way to their king, often in this prince phase, they're very, very focused on building, very focused on, in a way, it in a healthy way would do with providing and protecting the family, or building something of service for earth, not just being the tech mogul that builds the dick-shaped spaceship and blasts off to outer space. But that's my opinion about building. What are we building here? What are we actually creating as sacred humans in the stewardship of Gaia? So I'd just like to put that into the field as a question for the others.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And maybe you could put in the chat box, and I'll copy it and bring it over to Facebook. Those 4 archetypes.
Yeah.
King.
Yeah, it's 5 with the steward now. So it's the lover, the magician, the warrior, the steward, and the king.
Beautiful. And, as I hear that, I just want to acknowledge that we go through seasons in life, just like we go through seasons in the weather. And so probably as an older man, I've gone through seasons of those different things. So it's, we may be in a phase where we're more one than the other. And not every day it's all 5. But that's a beautiful, beautiful, I really love that. And I want to personally play with it a little bit. I wanted to also bring up, because we've talked a lot about, kind of a little bit about our past, what we're going through, but back to the integration of the divine masculine and divine feminine, and bring it up to certainly you, Eden, and then if Trish and Misha or anybody in our audience have anything to say about practices for integrating the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And something that was slightly touched on, I'll mention a practice. And this is a practice for couples that I've given to a lot of the couples that I work with. And that is, I call it the holding exercise. It's something actually that when Emily and I were in relationship, and actually even when she's visiting and staying with me, we still do, where when it's time to wind down, I hold her. We get into a very comfortable position on the couch, and I hold her exactly the way she wants to be held. And I drop into my divine masculine and just really feel that strength. And her job is to relax, to completely relax into my arms. And it's our bodies acting out what we need to do, because our bodies have its own intelligence. And this started with when we were living together and working together. She would need about an hour of being held like that to go from that work, get things done, get shit done mentality before she was ready to then go into the bedroom and make love or just relax. And so we learned it together. And I've since given that practice to at least 100 clients. And I've had couples that have been really disconnected. But by doing that practice, it brought them back together. Couples that hadn't made love in years becoming lovers again. And the point is that as the man, it helps us to remember we are in our divine masculine when we are creating safety for our beloved. And for a woman, she can trust her man when she can relax into his arms. But so often, sadly, in our culture, women have had to do, and then this resentment comes up because they're not really being able to be in their feminine, and they get pissed off at their men because they're having to be more masculine, and then they start harping at the man, and then the man starts contracting. I mean, we've all heard, wow, she really cut his balls off. And it's tragic. And we've all seen it. We've all known couples like that. And so the holding exercise is a wonderful practice for men to drop back into feeling the divine masculine, and for women to remember that they can relax into the arms of their man.
So beautiful, Scott. Thank you for sharing that. That really moved me. And I feel the co-regulation of the nervous system and the down-regulation of the nervous system when you share that. And the word surrender, like for the feminine in the mystery school teachings, the Great Mother is all about surrender. To be in our feminine, our deep feminine, is to surrender and receive. I surrender, I receive. Yeah, and that circuitry then. In the masculine, I think of Shiva holding Shakti. So beautiful.
Very important.
Thank
So
you.
there's one practice. Eden, do you have a practice you want to share? And then I'd love to hear from Trish and Misha, and I'll read some comments from our friends.
So I do a lot of Kriyas. That's an inner yoga practice. And I could even share a very simple one with our audience today. It's a bit of an aside. It's like a guided little experience. I do a lot of practices to balance the right and left brain and those energetic forces that I spoke about earlier, the two energies. One is the inward, downward, magnetic, gravitational spiral of the feminine, and the other is that electric, expansive, upward spiral of the masculine. And just for a moment, if you close your eyes with me and just let your hands relax in your lap and feel your central channel, breathing into your belly, bringing your awareness into the space behind your brow. And we're going to imagine an infinity loop that is blending the right brain hemisphere and the left. And you can kind of move your head on the occiput gently, just almost like an inner massage, massaging right brain, left brain, corpus callosum, oversoul activation, and then going the other way. It's like this soothing balancing. And then bringing your palms first just up to your heart and crossing your fingers in the natural way that you often would, that just feels comfortable. And then bringing your awareness into your heart chakra and making that infinity loop both behind your brow and in your heart. And just feeling that one flow that's most natural. And then crossing your hands the other way and reversing the infinity loop. It's a very subtle inner practice because our right brain is actually ruling over the left side of our body. So the right brain rules the feminine side, and it's diffuse and it's soft and it brings together, it coheres. It's the side of the brain that sees unity and harmony and kind of just creates this lovely glow when we only look out of our the opposite eye. So it would be the left eye. And then the left side of our brain is very focused. It's very detail oriented. It's very linear and rational. So as we balance these sides of our brain, we actually work on balancing our inner masculine and feminine essence and our tendencies to be either overly rational and intellectual and analytical and single focused with more of a unified view, larger pattern overview, or we balance out the diffuseness and maybe kind of like swirling uncertainty that we can get stuck in the feminine when it's out of balance with some more of that clarity. So this is a simple practice. It's an inner practice that we can do together.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to read a few comments coming in, and then Trish, if you want to share anything. And Misha kind of disappeared, but hopefully he'll be back.
I'm still here, but I'm on a cell signal now, so I'm just going to stay with my video off.
Oh, okay. Eleanor Joy writes, once during a peer counseling session back in the 90s, I experienced that, holding with a man, and it felt so safe and comforting. The feeling of acceptance still lingers. Think about that. We're talking about an experience she had 30 years ago, 25 or 30 years ago, and she can still remember it. That's how important that is. Thank you, Eleanor Joy. Connie Bear wants to make sure we talk about the she-bear, the fierce protective aspect of the feminine. I'm sure that Trish and Eden will have something to say about that. Eri writes, oh my God, yes, I've loved doing this with my partner. Mary Noonan writes, I have a beautiful, sensitive, awesome 21-year-old musician, gay godson, whom I've been telling him since he was a little boy, real men cry. And I still say that to him often now. He cries so easily with me, with no shame. He really gets that real men do cry, and I feel so much safer with men who are able to feel and express their grief. Right on. Jane Hernandez really appreciating the advice, and just lots of appreciations. Omashar, I was brought up by a single mom and feel very connected to the sacred feminine. I'm having trouble keeping boundaries. Are boundaries a masculine trait? Good question. Eden, do you want to tackle that?
That is a great question. I actually don't think boundaries or healthy boundaries are feminine or masculine in the sense that it's honoring our yes and our no. It's really about deep listening and navigating from our truth. And I feel like that is important in both being in our soft receptive nature and responding accordingly, or needing to take action and being more directed with our energies. I sometimes have shared that instead of thinking of a boundary as like a hard wall, think about it as raising your frequency and your emanation and your self-honor and your self-love and your self-trusting, and you're emanating this field of this resonant energy of what is welcome into your field and what is not. And you will start to recognize that behaviors and patterns that you might have once kind of entrained to or let hook into your emotional body in a more codependent way just don't work for you anymore. The more that you raise your self-love, self-honor, and self-respect, self-trusting, it's not that you need a harsh wall. You just speak from a very clear, aligned place, honoring your yes and no. So for me, it's not masculine or feminine.
I think we're maybe it can be perceived that way because I teach a lot about setting boundaries with compassion. And there's the trick. There's, again, the word for today, boys and girls, is balance, right? Because some people are good at setting boundaries, but not doing it in a compassionate way. And others are afraid to set boundaries because of the fear that you're going to think I don't care about you. So the first step, I believe, anytime we're saying no or setting a boundary, lead with authentic reassurance that we care. Start there. So it removes the perception that it's about not caring. It's actually about caring about myself and actually caring about you too, because clear boundaries create safety, right? Children, they might resist, but children need strong boundaries. Children that have strong boundaries and understand the boundaries, that's a healthy situation. But when they don't know what the boundaries are or why the boundaries are there, that's when it gets messed up. So lead with authentic reassurance that you care, set the boundary, explain why you're setting the boundary. A wonderful starting words are, I'm learning to take better care of myself. That's a great way of starting the process of explaining a boundary. And then afterwards, be present to the other person's uncomfortable feelings or unmet needs. Because they're probably going to be sad or disappointed or even angry. And that's okay. Doesn't mean you change the boundary, but we acknowledge their disappointment, their anger, their frustration, and we acknowledge their unmet need. And that's how we show care. And then if they still don't get it, then you run away. Trish, we have not heard from you for a bit. Anything you'd like to ruminate on?
Oh, I've been just listening and thinking about what you're sharing. As a millennial, maybe it's just my generation, or maybe there's not. Maybe it's just me. What I'm noticing is that we're definitely pushing up against what is masculine and what is feminine. We're definitely wanting to kind of balance that out in some manner. So for me, I spend a lot of time like considering myself as a man. You know, I love to cross dress a lot. And I love to embody my inner man and what that looks like. I've embodied all aspects of men that I was like, ugh, about, or even men that I've really loved. Or, you know, I've actually showed up in that space to find more empathy, and not as in like the empathy of like, oh, I'm trying to empathize with your deep, dark feelings, but really like, I just want to know what it's like to be you. And there's something really fascinating about even pretending or behaving as such, mirroring behavior. And it really gives like your body, like if you're moving your body in these very specific ways, your brain will actually start to have those thoughts and to have those feelings inside. And it's really like, that's been a really beautiful practice for me to really just love my inner masculine, or to be able to hold the inner feminine of a person who woke up in a testosterone running penis having body. You know, like, I don't know if I consider I woke up in a girl's body. Okay. I don't know what exactly that means, but it does these things and they're really cool. And you know, I think that when we start to really see ourselves in that balance, you know, that we start to really humanize not only our own-ness, our own humanness, or our own, you know, Edenness or Scottness or Misha-ness or Trishness, your own-ness, you really start to just humanize people, which makes them sacred in your eyes. You're like, oh, these beautiful divine beings have all the things. You know, just because Scott has, you know, he's testosterone running doesn't mean that he doesn't have the same things that I do. I mean, he's lacking just one experience monthly, but he also has, you know, the rhythm of hormonal movements in his world. And so does Misha, and so does, you know, every other human on the planet.
So I want to say something for a minute. You're absolutely right that us men can't ever understand what it's like for a woman going through hormonal stuff, menstruation. You're right. But you don't know what it's like getting an erection. And especially when we were younger and we were running a lot of testosterone, believe me, a young man's testosterone run erection desire is just as crazy making in its own unique way. And these are the things that we really need to educate each other about and be able to talk about at early ages before we get to the point of where we have to really do something about that erection, or where we can understand the beauty of the blood. Like since we're holding vision for an awakening world, may we change our whole educational system so that we grow up honoring the blood of menstruation and recognizing the drive that a young man gets in his adolescent ages and how that has to be managed. All those things. So I just wanted to mention that little piece.
Oh, I wasn't. I hope I wasn't sound like I was knocking men, and I
No,
wasn't.
I didn't take it that way. I didn't take it that way at all.
Yeah, like men have hormonal movements just like women, especially a lot of testosterone and a lot of, you know. This is not a sex coaching call.
Well, a little bit. There are a couple things that somebody asked. What about the woman holding the man? Absolutely, yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. I was just kind of how the man can drop into divine. But see, then it's because when the woman drops in to her divine feminine, once she's relaxed, once her nervous system is relaxed, and she's in that divine feminine, then as a man to be nurtured that way, to have, Trish knows, having this top head just rubbed and nurtured with a woman who's in her divine feminine, oh my God, that feels so good. So absolutely, both ways. And a couple more things I'll read and then I'll turn over to Eden. Eleanor Joy says, I'm appreciating all the sides of this discussion. Omashar writes, yes, I feel my monthly rhythms as a male. Atira says, I feel my erection and I'm female oriented. We have the same tissues, just not the same size. Well, that's a good point. And yes, and she says, I'm convinced men have cycles too. Omashar writes, we were never educated about what to do with that energy. Boy, ain't that the truth, bro. Women who reflect from their masculine speaks more clearly to men. That's from Mystic Abbot Jerry. I love Jerry, our wild monk. Our Mystic Abbot is with us as always. Thank you.
There's a lot that came up when Trish was sharing. First of all, I was remembering this fantastic movie from, I think, like late 80s called Orlando with Tilda Swinton. I don't know if many people have seen that, but in the movie, Orlando is this magical character that's born in, I don't know, maybe the 1400s and never dies and just changes gender every 100-something years or so, just changes. So Tilda Swinton plays this amazing being. And I just got a kick out of that as a young being who saw that movie and thought that would be amazing to have both experiences. And then recently my son with tech, with AI on his phone, this app he took a photo of me at the kitchen table and he turned me into a man. And it wasn't just like adding a mustache or a bald spot or something. It was so real looking. I was floored to see myself, my shape, eyes, lots of the bone structure remained very similar, the coloring, and I was totally male. And I ended up posting it on a Facebook story, just seeing what would happen, putting it out into the world that way. I got the most views and comments I've ever gotten on anything. It went like crazy. And women, very beautiful, attractive women writing me going, oh my God. I was like, who is this guy? I thought he was somebody that I could actually meet in real life. And I was like, wow, what is our world, with tech and this gender fluidity? What is it to be masculine and feminine? What is it when, I have friends who have transitioned. I have a dear one, partner of a dear brother who was born into a female body and is masculine appearing now completely and has testosterone because of technology, because of medicine, because of the ability to change our gender now, something we might have thought of 100 years ago or so as sci-fi or fantasy is reality. So how do we hold beings as sacred and divine, no matter what they are appearing or preferring to be called? This is such a new conversation. I'm really curious because our audience has been asking about androgyny and, what we think of this. What is it to be masculine? I think one of the questions was, is it just female? I mean, is it just physical to be female or male? And I think that eventually we move beyond this kind of questioning around, what is divine? Is it divine feminine, divine masculine? It's not genderified in the core of us. It's just what I like to think of as love and source energy and creative energy, expressing in such a myriad of ways and celebrating dazzling diversity and feeling and seeing unity through the heart. So that's my plug for the awakening of the heart of humanity, that we see each other as sacred and divine.
Thank you. And you do that so beautifully. Thank you, Eden. Thank you. I'm going to answer a couple questions, and then we're going to start wrapping up. So I'm going to share a few other resources. First off, people are asking, wow, this is really wonderful. Where do I see the replay? You can always find the replays for all the shows that I do in several places. They'll always be on my Facebook profile page. They'll always be in Love Coach Academy. Love Coach Academy is my primary organization that Trish is a big, big part of. And if you go to the videos section, not only will you see all of the videos that Scott does, but you'll find the Self-Love Show, which Trish does every Thursday morning. And I really want to encourage people, go to the Self-Love Show, Thursday mornings, 10 o'clock Pacific time. And of course, I've got the Awakening World. And ironically, kind of perfect, I'm just going to talk about next week, because next week, the Awakening World is all about relationships. We are collaborating with my friend Stephen Rowland, he actually took my Relationship Essentials course 4 times. He took it every time I offered it, 4 years in a row, and has gone on to create a new company, which is launching on Valentine's Day, called Relation Flicks. Think Netflix about relationships. And there's all these wonderful teachers, one of which, of course, is myself, but a lot of my love coaches, Trish, Jessica, Paul Sterling, many of the love coaches are part of this. And so we're collaborating with him next weekend on the Awakening World. And so, again, the Awakening World now always tackles a topic. And we always have it on Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday morning. So join us next Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday morning. And you're going to meet some really amazing relationship teachers. And definitely join us for that. Also, Misha's computer crashed, apparently. But I want to take people again one more time to his internet, or not his internet, but his web page, which is evolve.men. Evolve.men. And there's some really beautiful things here, a lot of wonderful articles and ways that you can work with him. I was really impressed with him today. Also, I want to promote that Christy Michaels, who's with us, has a wonderful event that she's doing tomorrow night, which, as though I didn't do enough this weekend, I am also hosting and going to be participating in. And it's all about the birth and rise of the divine feminine. Isn't that perfect for what we're talking about today? And you'll find that at gospelofmarymagdalene.info. gospelofmarymagdalene.info. If you have any questions about that, Christie's can pop it in the chat box. She'll put kind of any information there. Eden, tell us a little bit about some of your offerings. I certainly would love to turn people on. I love your quiz, your questionnaire. So is it okay if I show that? And we talk about that for
totally show that. That's fun. That's for everyone, for men and women. And even though I've been a divine feminine mystery school teacher for years, I am working with men more in a one-on-one coaching, sacred masculine coaching. The quiz you can show if you want to share your screen.
Sure.
It's really
So-
sweet.
And a lot of people have been asking how to get in touch with you. Whoops, hang on.
Oh yeah.
And so it's her name, EdenAmadora.com. EdenAmadora.com. And so if you go to her website, there she is. And you scroll down, one of the very first things you'll see the moment you scroll under her first photo is take the quiz and discover your beloved archetype. And it's a really fun quiz, and it's automated. So you take it and you automatically get back kind of your archetype. And what are some of the archetypes, Eden?
Yeah, so there's archetypes are based on the divine feminine archetypes I work with that men can also really be served by looking at in their own inner feminine essence. So some of the answers will take you into, for instance, if you're very, very sensitive and empathic and intuitive and more like have this kind of feeling like I feel your heart. I'm so sensitive, but I don't actually know often how to have boundaries that support me. We talked about boundaries today. We might get the magical archetype, for instance. It's based on a few of the archetypes I work with in the Divine Feminine Mystery School. And the magical lover archetype is full of incredible gifts that you'll learn about and some practices to help you balance with what we would call maybe more of the shadow patterns. And shadow patterns are just those parts of us that are yet to be really integrated and loved into our empowered wholeness, even though we are whole, beautiful, sovereign beings. It's the parts that are catching up. So another archetype might be the courageous lover, which, these are people, and especially in feminine bodies who've been more in, the masculine world, almost like competing and wearing the pants and doing it better than the men and wanting to really, build and protect and prove who they are. And sometimes the courageous lovers have a hard time with vulnerability. So there's practices and information to give you to really start to nurture that balance. And the whole quiz is based on this balancing of the inner masculine and inner feminine. So there's different answers that you'll get, different areas on that spectrum. And then what I'm also very passionate about, Scott, I don't know if you could go back to the shared screen or if I have the ability to do that, but there's an offering I have called the Sun Heart Initiation. If you scroll up under offerings and you click on Sun Heart, the Sun Heart Initiation is a 13-week course that is really guiding you into that relationship with the divine beloved within, which is that balanced inner masculine and feminine essence. And for men, it's like meeting your anima, your divine feminine essence, and learning about the divine feminine that not only lives in women, but lives through you, through your open heart, through your balanced essence. And then there is the animus for women, learning about that sacred masculine essence that lives in your heart. In Jungian psychology and in Native American mystical traditions, they believe that we are always two spirits, that our bodies are one gender and our soul is actually the other gender. And that coming into union and embodying our soul, making a real home for our soul essence it's kind of like the name of the game in this quest of awakening and embodying our divinity. So this course is about that. There's 13 beautiful guided journeys, practices, so much holding and love to feel where you are on the spectrum through these different archetypal temples. And that's a self-guided journey that you do still get to meet with me. So you go on the journey yourself, and then once a month we come together for mentoring and Q&A about what's been coming up for you. It's a really beautiful experience for the people who've done it. And check out that page on EdenAmadora.com. I think you're muted, Scott. The dogs were too barky.
Exactly. I had to go grab her because she was like, right there she is. This is one of my little teachers, is Jasmine Bear. So, anything else, Eden, that you want to mention in terms of your offerings?
Yeah, so I'm about to set sail for a very deep dive into the divine feminine mysteries. And we are embarking on a year-long priestess initiation, both in person and now because of the pandemic that, we had to all pivot and figure things out a couple years ago. I started an online training, and this one, I would say it's more for training women in being like emissaries and embodiments of the goddess and the divine feminine. That being said, I'm always listening. If there's a man who feels like, I am in my heart balanced in my androgyny, I want to learn about the goddess, and not just learn in a conceptual way, in a very ceremonial initiation way, an embodied way, to be in this practice and this training with me, then I'm here to listen if you're really called. If not, then the sacred masculine archetypal mentoring and teaching is more appropriate. But this is for women who go on a soul deep journey for 13 moons, because funny, in this patriarchal system, they've tried to create a 12-month system, and then poor February gets jostled around all the time. But we have 13 moons, and to honor those natural cycles, we meet for 13 moons together. So it's a very deep dive, a year-long training. We go through all 13 moon archetypal temples, ceremonial initiations. It's held in such a loving container, so much support, so much mentoring, deep soul growth, very catalytic, inner alchemy. We are moving energy. This is not like a therapeutic process. It's recommended to have done the therapy first. We're going to go into the deeper embodiment work in this circle. So for people who are feeling like, oh my God, I've been looking for something like this, I'm ready to step into my leadership as love. I'm ready to work on the deep stuff that I'm, years of talk therapy hasn't gotten to. I'm ready for that archetypal initiation to then step forward and really serve from this portal. This is for you. I'm speaking to you. And I think Trish earlier said, I've considered myself a lamp lifter, and that's what we're doing here. We're lifting the lamp. We are presencing essence. We are really calling you into that soul remembrance in this work. So yes, if you're feeling called, you can reach out to me. You can private message me through Facebook. I'm Eden Amadora. You can find me through social media, also on YouTube and Instagram, and then of course through the website. So that is my big year-long training. Thanks for inviting me to share about that.
Absolutely. And I've put your link, how to apply for your training, into Unify Facebook and into our chat box here.
Thank you so much.
I also am going to put the spotlight on Trish. And Trish's website is Embodied-Happiness. And she does create that. She's a wonderful coach. I have had the good fortune to work with her pretty much every Friday night on the show that we have been doing together. Plus, she's a good friend. She's part of Love Coach Academy. And she is a brilliant coach. So you'll find her at embodied-happiness.com. And Trish, tell us a little bit about your coaching work and what you really enjoy specializing in.
Well, I am a certified sex and relationship coach through Sex Coach University. So I love talking about sex. So if you want to come and talk about that with me, come on over. Currently, I am doing some really deep work with the women that come to see me around codependency. And so we're starting to dissolve and sand away some of the beliefs that maybe aren't yours. And with men, I'm really helping them drop into their body, their love, their truth, and to show up more lovingly. And that's kind of what my practice looks like right now.
Beautiful. So many people are asking, what's Trish's last name? How do I find Eden Amadora? So I think you're going to get a lot of
My name is Trish Wright.
W-R-I-G-H-T.
And if you want to find me on Facebook, you can just type in after the little dash is Trish Wright Loves.
And that she does. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us. This was a very spontaneous thing that Eden and I decided to do, I think, about 4 days ago. So thank you, Eden, in the midst of moving, being co-host on 3 of my shows last weekend, doing this. Trish, thank you for jumping in, helping me to relax when I didn't know where Eden was, and I knew that Trish was there at helping me relax a little bit. So thank you very much. Misha, wherever you are in Misha land, thank you for being with us. And yeah, lots of people saying great conversation. Thank you so much. God's blessings to all of you, everybody. And you will be able to find this on the YouTube channel, Global Peace Tribe, on Love Coach Academy videos. And remember the self-love show Thursday mornings at 10 o'clock, because it all starts with self-love. Take care, everybody. Thanks for
Bye,
tuning in.
everyone.
I'll go to gallery view for a minute so we can see. Turn on your cameras, people. Let us see you for a minute. There are some of our friends. We had about 50 people with us today in the Zoom room. Thank you, everybody, for being with us.
Great conversation.
Yeah, God's blessings. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.